Nick mentioned earlier, we're wrapping up our series, Grace Changes Everything, today. And in fact, before the first service, the worship team said something like, well, we're wrapping up today, right? Kind of like a question. And I was like, well, we could, or we could keep going, because for like the last 8 weeks, we've been talking about grace. And honestly, I personally feel like I could talk about this forever. I feel like I could go on and on talking about how grace influences every aspect of our life. Today is no exception of what we see, how grace influences every aspect of our experience in this life. Years ago, about 11 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, I came home one evening. And I was going to go for a run after dinner, and so I was going to eat a light meal and then go for a jog around the block. And when I sat down to eat, I started eating, and towards like the midway through the meal, I started to feel like something in my gut. And you know, like for me and eating, that's like a common thing. I'm like something's not settling right, you know. Some of you people know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I was eating, you know, and I was like, I don't know what that is. And then I was like, that's kind of a funny pain. Like it felt like I tore something. It felt like something else was maybe wrong. But I finished up eating because I always do that, right? And so after dinner, I thought, all right, I'm just gonna like lay down and just chill for a minute. And so I went and like laid on the floor, and I was like, okay, just give this a few minutes, let it process, and I'll be good. I can go for my run. And like 10 minutes goes by, 20 minutes goes by, 30 minutes goes by, and like this pain, like this stomach thing isn't going anywhere. And so I started to get a little bit like kind of concerned. Eventually I was just like, I'm not going for a run. Finally I just thought, I'm gonna go to bed. I'll just go to, because that fixes everything, amen? Like, go to bed, it just fixes everything. Just go to sleep. So I go to bed, I wake up in the morning, and it's still there. In fact, not only still there, it's kind of strong now. And I'm like, I don't remember tearing anything. I don't remember, like, pulling a muscle. I didn't actually exercise, so it doesn't explain this thing that's going on. I don't think it was Sherry's cooking. Like, I was going through that list, you know. So finally, I called the doctor, and the doctor said, no more monkeys jumping on the, no, just kidding. I called the doctor, and the doctor said, hey, I want you to go downtown or the Rockwood, you know, down there by the freeway. I need you to get like a scan, MRI, whatever, CPR, whatever that thing, you know, there's all these letters, I forget. I want you to go down there and get like the scan, the whole thing, and then they'll let us know what's going on. So I was like, all right, cool. So I drive myself down there to that Rockwood, you know, down on 8th or whatever. And I go in, and they put me in the machine that makes everybody, even if you're not claustrophobic, feel claustrophobic. And they do the whole scan thing, and then I experienced something that very few people experience in life. I got out of the machine, and as I was kind of like grabbing my keys and kind of putting myself together, the guy that was running the thing, comes out to me, and he goes, hey, would you mind holding on just a second before you go? That doesn't usually happen, right? Like usually, like you go in and get tested, and the tech's like, your doctor will be back with you in 7 to 9 weeks. Right? You're like, oh, okay, so it's not urgent. No, it is, but your doctor won't get back with you for 7 to 9 weeks. You're like, okay, good. So normally that happens, and he's like, you know, like clearly something's really wrong when the tech's like, you might want to sit down for a minute. And so he sits me down in this chair, and I'm like, huh. So he like goes, he gets on the phone, and I can tell he's calling my doctor, which I'm like, when does this happen? So I call Sherry, and I'm like, whatever it is, it's good. Like, this is good. Like, whatever's happening, I'm getting the best care ever right now. He hangs up the phone. He goes, we need you to get over to Sacred Heart now. You have an appointment. Your appendix is about to burst, and we need to remove it like immediately. Like you are on the verge. Like if it doesn't in the next like minute, it'll be a shock. And so I'm like, all right, cool. Like never done this before. So I drive myself over to Sacred Heart. This was hilarious because he was like, do we have somebody to drive you? And I was like, no, I'll just drive myself. I drove here, I can drive there. I drove over, went to the front desk, I like checked in like a hotel. I'm like, I've got a room, Brad Williams, you know, and the guy up front's like, well, let me get you a wheelchair. So I waited and waited and waited. Finally, I was like, hey, what floor is this whole thing gonna go down on? And he goes, oh, you need to go, you know, like the station's here, but you can't go up by yourself. I was like, watch me. So I go up, I come up to the nurse's counter. I'm like, yes, my name is Brad Williams. I have an appointment of some sorts for an emergency surgery. And she goes, what are you doing standing here? And I said, checking in? I don't know. Like, I didn't know how to describe this. It was so weird. Do you need like a credit card for incidentals? I don't know. So they rushed me in, and they like take me in. I remember like Sherry didn't even get there like for the surgery. She was like, you know, going to Costco. And like, honey, I don't think I can make it. We got to get eggs. So I do the surgery, you know, and I come out, and, you know, like that surgery, like they just like tore me open, you know, and gave me lots of drugs. That was basically how that whole thing went. And I woke up in the hospital, and it was like just this crazy, surreal thing. I have vague memories. I said lots of embarrassing things, and then they let me go home. And the recovery at home, I experienced something that I'll never forget. I went home, and there was something that happened in my life. And see, leading up to that point, there were a lot of things going on. I tend to pack my schedule. I live a fairly busy life. I'm usually going all over the place, traveling, doing different things. 10 years ago, that was just as much the case as it was today. And at that point in my life, I found myself now stuck in my bedroom. I had a bunch of detective models that you buy in the grocery store, and those novels. I was just reading these novels and recovering, and I wasn't allowed to move and do all these things. And I suddenly had this moment where I realized I had been given a gift. All of the expectations that anybody had of me, all of the to-do items on my to-do list, anything that I thought I was going to get done, anything that was hanging over me, it was like somebody took a whiteboard, dry erase board, and just wiped all of those things clean, and I got a fresh start. It was like somebody hard reset the computer. They hit the easy button. All of a sudden, I was like, I got an excuse to not do anything, right? Anything I committed to, any expectation anyone has, anything that preceded this moment, it was like the slate was wiped clean. You know what I'm saying? All of a sudden we were now here and the past didn't matter. Not only that, I don't know if this was still the drugs and their residual effect, but I also was really not concerned with the future. I just made it through this surgery, and I was, kind of recovering, and I was thinking about life and all this difference, and the future, the far-off distant future, didn't really matter to me in this moment. So I found myself just in my bedroom, chilling, hanging out, reading weird detective novels, and noticing all of the beautiful moments that are right in front of me. I remember this. I remember laying in bed. I remember the sunshine coming in our bedroom. When I close my eyes and imagine this, I still remember it so clearly. I remember the sunshine just shining through our window, and I remember how brilliant it was. It was like a different kind of sunshine. I remember the plants outside of our window, our backyard, and just looking out there and being overwhelmed with all the detail and the green and just all the color. There was something happening where I was in the moment. The past didn't matter. The future was out of my perspective, and I was just caught up in the now. And in that point in time, at that moment right there, I realized something. This is the first time this ever hit me, and I want you to catch this morning. So many people are stuck in the past or paralyzed by the future, but very few are truly present in the moment. Are you with me in this? Very few people are present in the moment. Why? Well, because we have this tendency to get stuck in the past, right? We get stuck in all the things that have preceded this time that we're in right now. We have experiences, some of them good. Sometimes it's the glory days that we get caught up on. It's the good things that happened. It's the life that was so good at one point, we don't know it'll ever be repeated again. And so we constantly are going back and dreaming about back when we were or did or lived this sort of way. Sometimes we get caught in the past in a different sort of way. Sometimes it's the decisions that we made that we can't get over. For all of us, every one of us in the room, you know what all of us share in common? We messed up. We've all messed up. We've all made a decision at some point we regret, right? All of us can look back, and there are things that we decided to do that we wish we could go back and undo. And there are things we didn't do that we wish that we could do, like buy Apple stock when it was really low, things like that, right? We all have these things, right? We all have this stuff in our life where we look back and go, man, I really wish I would have done something different there. I really wish I would have made different choices. I know that there are things that are existing in my life because of a choice that I made back then. All of us have those sorts of things. Not only that, there are some of us, it's not even things we chose. It's just stuff in our past that happened to us, right? We didn't choose the house we were born into. We didn't choose the house we grew up in. We didn't choose the school we went to. There's just stuff that happened because we were born in this petri dish of a life and certain things took place, and we look back on our past and we go, man, I hate my past, but it's still affecting our present. See, that's common among humanity. The same thing happens with our future. You know, the human brain, we are capable of so many wonderful and amazing things. We can synthesize and we can create and we can elaborate. We can do things that no other creature on the planet can do. But that can also be our demise when we start to apply those gifts and talents to the uncertainty of our future. Because worry and fear and planning and control begin to stir up in our lives. All of those things can suddenly be the dominant thing inside of our heads. All of us can start to think about, worry about, plan about the future rather than live in the moment. And so it turns out that we have plenty of people around us, and maybe in this room, there are plenty of us that are living just consumed with our past. There are plenty of us that are living consumed with our futures. But what we lack today are people who are actually present in the moment. And yet, here's what's ironic about this. If you think about the people in your life that you respect the most, think about the people you love to be with, think about the people in history that you admire the most, over and over again, what you discover is that they're people who had this ability to be present in the now. Am I right? Like, think about the people you love being with. They're the people who, when they look you in the eyes and have a conversation with you, there's this sense of they're right there with you. They're not someplace else. They're present in the moment. When you think about the people who make a difference, the people who leverage their lives for good in the world, for flourishing, for other people, they're people who recognize the moment that's in front of them. So the question is this: how do you and I go from being people bogged down in our past to being people who are living in the present? How do we go from people who are worried about our future to being people who are living in the present? It turns out that grace affects this. No surprise, right? Grace changes everything. And it turns out that grace, the gospel, intersects our past so powerfully and speaks to our future so effectively that we are freed to live fully in the moment, in the present. Let me just say this again. If you're taking notes, you can write this thing down because I think it's worth remembering. Grace intersects with our past so powerfully and speaks to our future so effectively that we are freed, we are released to live fully in the present, to be present in the moment. That's what grace does. There's this verse that a lot of people quote around churches. And if you're not a church person, I'll let you know this. Church people like to choose favorite verses out of the Bible, which is always a puzzling thing to me. That's like parents choosing favorite children, which isn't okay. I know my parents have a favorite, but it isn't okay, right, for parents to choose favorite children. But people choosing favorite verses, I'm just like, why? Like, how do you choose one? But this is one of those that I always hear people quote. People are like, what's your favorite verse? And people say this one, and it's found in Jeremiah 29, verse 11. How many of you have heard this one before? Raise your hand, a few of you. Okay. It says this: "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." I hear people say, man, that's such a powerful verse. I just carry that with me. I've tattooed it somewhere. I memorized it. I keep it in my car. Like, it's all, like, and I got to say, if I had a nickel for every time that somebody said that was their favorite verse, I'd have a lot of nickels. Like, I'd be a very wealthy man because this is a very, very quoted verse in the Bible. But I often wonder this: when people quote this verse or say this is inspiring them or this has gotten them through a particular season, do they understand the context of the words that these verses fall in? Because if you understand when these words are spoken, if you understand how they're being spoken, if you understand the significance of the circumstances around them, it's more than just a cute statement. There is something powerful that happens to us, that happens to our past and our future, that allows us to live in the present when you understand what's happening around these verses. See, this verse, this whole idea of God saying, I have plans for you, plans to prosper you, to give you hope, that you would actually have a future. These words come in the middle of a desperate situation, in the middle of a crisis. The people of Israel, God's chosen people, as we read the Old Testament, the people of Israel had come into this situation where because of their horrible decisions, they were really facing their demise. For decades, they've been making decisions to wander away from God. They've been pursuing their own lives. They'd lived really separate from Him. They'd lived a different kind of life than what God had dreamed for them. And so their lives were just disintegrating. The nation of Israel was in unrest. It was an absolute mess. These decisions that they made had had consequences. And in the early pages of this same book, Jeremiah, and if you look at chapter 1 and the chapters that follow that, you see that Israel is being conquered by a neighboring nation, the nation of Babylon. The Babylonian people are coming into Israel, and they are basically destroying their cities, they're burning their homes, and they're carrying off the people to live in the city of Babylon, to be assimilated into that culture, basically wiping them off the face of the planet. Their homes are destroyed, their cities are laid to waste. It's total catastrophe. And they become captives. Now, things are not obviously going the way that they expected them to go in their life. In fact, their worst nightmare has become a reality. And by the time you reach Jeremiah chapter 29, the people of Israel they're living in a shanty town. They're living in a makeshift village outside the city of Babylon. They're living in this place, and they're in a sort of holding pattern. They're stuck in this place where they don't know what to do with their past because their past has all sorts of conflicting messages, and they don't know what to do with their future because they can't see that they have one. And so they're just sort of caught in the middle. They're just sort of biding their time. They've just decided to just live on the edges and never really engage. Very similar to how so many people in our culture today are just sort of getting through, caught someplace between the past and the future, but not really present in the moment. The people of Israel find themselves saying, well, now what? What do we do? And they're just in this sort of neutral space. They're just getting by. They're just kind of humming along. Now, why are they paralyzed? Why are they stuck? Well, they're stuck because they have a past. These people have a past, and that past has them stuck. The truth is, all of us have a past. All of us have a past. It is impossible to make it to adulthood, much less middle life, right? Without having a laundry list of regrets. It's impossible for us. Like there are things that we chose to do, and there are things that maybe we didn't choose to do, but things that just happened to us that we would never choose for us. There are things in our life that we would call a past, right? There are things that have caused pain. There are things that have caused anguish for us. I know for me, there's stuff in my life. There are times when I look back on my story, and I can go back 20 years or 10 years or 2 years. I can look back at things in my life, and I go, man, I really hope, I hope that nobody ever discovers this thing about me. Like there's stuff like, they're like stories from college, and I think, man, I hope that nobody ever hears. I hope no one at Summit ever hears that story about me in college, right? There's decisions that I made. There are things and conversations that I've had in my home with my wife where I think to myself, I hope nobody turned on a video camera so that we ever have to replay the words I spoke to my wife. There are things like that in my story. There are things I regret. There are things that I mean, just like all of you, there is stuff in my past that I go, man, I really regret those things taking place. All of us share that. You know that? Not one of us is exempt from those kinds of things. All of us have regret. But here's what we do with our past. We hide it. We stuff it. We suppress it. It's like we put this mask on and go, man, if I can just move on and not let anybody see this, then maybe I can just get by and we'll all forget about it. And so we do our best to make sure that people don't see whoever we once were and they don't know whatever we once did. That's how we live our lives. We don't want people to know who we were or what we did. And so we just put a mask on and we stuff it and we hide it and we trudge through our days. All the while, that outburst that we had with our kids, that wasn't about the kids. That's about something in my past, right? All that work that we engage in, that's not about integrity. That's about insecurity, isn't it? All of the pleasing, that's not about loving people. That's about being loved, feeling love. See, it turns out that our pasts are still influencing our present. And so we're not stepping up, we're not stepping out because we have these fears that are rooted in our past. Our past still impacts our present. That's what's happening with the people of Israel in Jeremiah 29. They're stuck in the past. They've got all this stuff. They've got the mistakes. They've got all the errors. They've got who they could have been, and then they've got who they are. And who they are isn't very pretty because of the things that they've done. That's what's happening. Then these words are spoken. They're spoken before verse 11 of Jeremiah 29. Listen to this. It says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." Now, All kinds of beautiful stuff in here. In fact, this is one of my favorite passages. If you've ever been around Summit, you know I love this passage of Scripture. There are things that we're going to see in a couple of minutes that are really cool here. But the first thing, the most beautiful, the most surprising, the most wonderful thing, at least to the people of Israel, when they heard these words at that point in their history, the most beautiful thing is the first line in verse 4, "Thus says the Lord." Because that means God is still speaking. God is still present. Even though they turned their backs on him, even though there were consequences of decisions they've made, even though their life hadn't turned out at this point like they had imagined, God has not turned his back on them. God is not done with them. Even though they've walked through difficult days, God's story for them is not over. That's so powerful that their past was being overridden by the reality of God's commitment to continue to work with them. See, so many times you and I, we get stuck in our past. We get stuck in whatever happened before these days, whether it's the glory days or whether it's the bad decisions, whatever it is. And we start feeling like, well, it's over, right? Like I blew my opportunity. I've been benched. I've been sidelined. Like God's not going to do anything with me because of my story, because of whatever this is. Listen, I want you to understand this. The story could not have been any messier than it was for Israel. Your story, no matter how messy your story is, no matter how ugly you think your past is, it does not preclude God from speaking to you now and working in your presence. Amen? Like God is not done with you. When these people hear that God is still interested in them, there was something that happened to them. There was something that changed. And when you and I realize that regardless of our past, God is still continuing to work in our present, there is something that happens to us. When you and I experience this thing called grace and forgiveness, there is something that happens in us when we encounter that. See, that is the power of the gospel over our past. That's why this story of Jesus is so powerful and not just a fairy tale that certain people believe. The message of Jesus fully affirms what? That we are all broken, right? The message of Jesus fully affirms that we all have a past, that we all have brokenness, that we all have scars because of things that have happened in the days that preceded this one. But in the middle of all of that stuff, the story of Jesus, the story of the gospel says, God's not done with you. There is a grace that covers. And how you and I respond to the past painful things, how you and I respond to the decisions that we've made, how you and I respond to the circumstances that we never would have chosen for ourselves, it is radically altered by our understanding of grace. When you and I can know deep in our beings that we have been forgiven, that God says, let's do this. Regardless of your past, when we realize that God knew us then and he knows us now and he yet still extends mercy to us, when we realize those things, there is something powerful that transpires inside of us. When he speaks into our lives, when we realize he's not done, when we discover he has the ability to redeem and renew and restore, there's something that happens in us. And the stuffing and the hiding and the suppressing is just relieved. And we experience this dynamic of forgiveness and grace. That's how the grace influences our past. We are no longer stuck in the past. We become people of the present. God says, I don't want you to think about that. I don't want you to dwell on that. It isn't about that. It's about now. Ironically, the same thing happens with our future. Look again at verse 11, totally future-oriented verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. I think there's a reason why so many people quote this verse, so many human beings, and I think it's this, because we are, as beings, as humans, we are very future-oriented people. We know that there is something coming. We have an awareness, we have an understanding that other creatures don't have on this planet. We have an awareness that there's more than the moment that we're in. And so there's a side of this that's very beautiful. There's a philosophical side of this that draws us to God, right? This idea that this moment that we're in is not all that there is also the same thing that draws us towards a God and says there is something beyond whatever the circumstances we find ourselves in. But the other reason this is so often quoted is that the future is often what paralyzes us. Not only are we aware of the future, but simultaneously we often get paralyzed by the future. Why? Because uncertainty is paralyzing, isn't it? Like, how many times have you ever seen a kid like just struggle to get on a roller coaster, and they'll stand there and there's a roller coaster that's, starting and stopping in the same place. You can see the beginning and you can see the end, and you see the same people who got on getting off, and everybody's living, and yet there's a person who's standing there waiting to get on, and they're paralyzed by fear. Why? Because there's uncertainty about what comes in between, right? I don't know. Maybe I will be the first 8-year-old to die of a heart attack on a roller coaster, right? You think those things. That's what uncertainty does. When we don't know the outcomes, we freeze, right? When we don't have control over our circumstances, we get stuck. We get stuck. When we aren't sure, we go on lockdown. And deep down, all of us know, this is what's crazy, all of us know that we cannot control our futures. In a room like this, if we all got honest, we'd all say, yeah, absolutely. We don't control our futures. I don't control my future. I know I don't have control over what happens to me tomorrow. And yet, what do I do and what do you do? What do we all do? We do everything in our power to manipulate, to control, to shape our futures. Even though we know we don't control it, we spend our days working to eliminate uncertainty, saving so that we can establish predictability. We do our best efforts to try to guarantee control over our future, to the point where our future begins to drive our present. See, in the same way our past keeps us from being present, our future and our obsession with controlling it also simultaneously keeps us from living in the moment. We're so concerned about what happens next. I have this friend, every time I sit down with him to coach him, he's a pastor. He's a little older than me, and every time we sit down, I say, hey man, what questions are you asking that I can help you with? And every time he goes, well, I got 2 questions. You know the first one. The first question is, am I going to have enough money to retire? He saw it like some commercial somewhere, and he keeps saying it to me. I'm like, I'm not here to help you with that. And he's like, but you used to be a financial advisor. I'm like, no, go to a real financial advisor, not me, okay? Don't do that. And then we get to the questions. But he always brings this up. Why? Because there's uncertainty about his future, right? There's uncertainty. And there's so much uncertainty about his future that it drives his present. It drives my present. But what happens when we experience grace? In this whole series, what we've been talking about is this idea that whatever God does, he does not because of what we've done, but because of who he is. That's the nature of grace. Grace is not about my effort. It's not about my ability. It's not about my striving. It isn't about my religiosity. Grace is about God working on my behalf regardless of what I've done. And we experience God's grace. We experience his forgiveness. We experience new life in him apart from our actions and our work. That same grace, as we realize it applies to our future, liberates us from the paralyzing effects of trying to control it. When we recognize that God is in control, not just of our present, when we recognize that God was able to work through our past and work in our present despite us, we begin to acknowledge the same thing about our future. That's what's happening with the people of Israel in Jeremiah 29. It's like they're looking at their lives saying, listen, if God can work in this mess now, then I think I can trust him with my future. If grace can work powerfully in my past, how much more can it work in my future? See, there's this connection with the present and your future. There's a relationship, and it's not the relationship you'd think. There's this relationship that says when you and I begin to trust God with our future, we are freed to live fully in the present. And when you and I begin to live fully in the present, we move towards the future that God has set for us. So trust him with your future. And again, that makes us people of the present. And that was the point all along. Jeremiah 29:11 is preceded by these verses. We already read them. I want to read them again. I want you to listen to how he's describing this life lived in grace. He says in verse 5, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Do you see what's happening here? It's about the here and the now. It's about being present in the moment. It's saying, listen, I know you have a past. Let's forget the past. And I know you have concerns about the future, but let's trust God with your future and let's live in the moment. Your past has been redeemed and a future is promised. And this present life of flourishing is inspired. That's what we're seeing here. So what does it mean to be present? What does it mean for you and I to be present? It means we stop being consumed by our past. It means we stop being consumed by our future and we live towards the people in front of us as if they're really there. It means we look at people in the eyes. It means we look at the moments in front of us and realize this moment that we're in matters more than any other. It means that we quit planning for moments and we live in the ones that are in front of us. It means we look at our own lives and we think about our influence. It means we take seriously the fact that we actually have a reason for being here. It means we do the hard work of wondering how we influence the people around us. It means we look at our jobs and our schools and our families and our neighbors, and we think there's a reason that I'm here in this moment. No matter how insignificant it might seem, this moment matters, and I'm going to live fully and wholeheartedly towards everything that's put in front of me. I'm going to live this out and quit worrying about my past and quit worrying about my future and be who it is God created me to be in the now. That's what this is leading us to. It means we face tomorrow with a sense of honor. It means we face tomorrow with a sense of privilege. We face tomorrow with a sense of responsibility in this world, and we realize I am not in this moment. I am not in these people's lives. I am not in this cubicle or sitting at this desk on accident. I am here, and I will be in the moment. Quit thinking about the stuff that isn't happening to you. There's so much stuff we worry about that isn't happening to you. It isn't happening to you because it's either in your past or it's not in your future. And yet we still worry about it. All we have is now. And that's what every day reminds us of. Every day we have this amazing thing. Every day the sun comes up, and I don't know about you. I know not everybody's a morning person. I'm a morning person. And I love it when the sun comes up. Because every day that the sun comes up, there is this sense that I get that today is a new day. And the slate's been wiped clean, and I get a fresh start to live this day. And at the end of this day, the sun's going to go down, and it's going to be over. And then maybe, if I don't get struck by lightning, I'll get another one. But that's all I get. Even in our creation, we have been built into this rhythm to live for today, to live in the moment. And so the question is this: Are you dragging your past into the present and allowing it to keep you from being fully alive? Is there something that you're carrying with you? Are there circumstances? Are there things you said? Are there things you did? Are there things that people did to you? Are there things that have happened in your life that have been so painful, so unsavory, that when you think about living in the moment, when you think about being who God created you to be, when you think about stepping up or stepping out in faith, that somehow those things just seem to drag you down, and so you live bogged down by those things? Do you let the relationships around you, do you let the circumstances that you find yourself in now, are they all clouded by whatever happened in the past? Are you letting the grace of God wash over your past and give you a new start? Are you letting the reality that He knows your brokenness and forgives you change how you're living today? The same thing about your future. Are there things in your future that you're just so consumed with? Is there stuff that you're worried about? Are there things that you can't get over? Do you spend too much time watching Fox News and wondering where this whole country's going? Are you consumed with worry and anxiety? Are you consumed with your money? Are you consumed with your kids, your family, whatever? What is it in your future that you're just looking out to and so worried about that it's keeping you from living in the moment with the people that are in front of you? Grace wants you to be in the moment. Grace says, listen, if God has your past and God has your present, He certainly has your future. Quit living towards that future in a way that describes you controlling it and let God redefine it for you? Are you present? Are you the kind of person who is present with the people around you? About a week ago, somebody sent me a video. And it was a video of a few friends and I climbing Mount Adams. And it was different segments, different moments of us climbing the mountain. And at one point, I caught a glimpse of myself telling a story around a campfire. And while I occasionally am forced to hear myself on iTunes or see a video that somebody has recorded in here, I never see myself tell a story to a group of friends. And in that moment, I was sort of taken back. And as I looked at myself, I thought, I'm not who I think I am. Because when I'm off of this stage and I'm with my family or hanging out with my friends, the person I am is insecure because of my past and is uncertain about my future, but rarely am I present in the moment. And when I saw myself in this video, I thought, why do I not understand how much influence, how much impact, how much difference I can make in the most mundane of moments? And I realized it's because of my past and my future and how they're clouding me from living in my present. Jesus has come and given us grace so that we can be in the here and the now. This morning, we're going to take communion together, and I'm going to ask the band to come. And as the band comes, I'm just going to challenge you with this today. We're going to take the elements, a cup with grape juice in it, and a wafer that none of us would choose to eat outside of this room. And they are just, objectively, that's what they are. Objectively, it is a cup with grape juice and a wafer. But subjectively, they mean the world to us. Symbolically, they are everything. Us gathering in a place like this, us participating in communion, it is not a simple religious experience as most people understand religious experiences. People think a religious experience is this moment where you sort of get a spiritual high. Let me just say, we can have those kinds of experiences in all sorts of places. A true, genuine religious experience is not an experience. It's actually something that happens to us that alters every other experience that we have. When you and I participate in communion, when we acknowledge the gospel and what it has done for us in our past and what it does for us in our future, it is more than just a solitary moment of intimacy with God. It is literally us acknowledging the deepest of religious experiences, the one that changes all of life experience. All that we encounter is changed as a result of what Jesus did for us on the cross. And so with that, this morning, the ushers are going to come and they're going to distribute the elements. And I'm going to encourage you to hold them. And then take some time and examine your past, your future, the worries of your heart, the anxieties about your past. And ask yourself, am I letting what Jesus has done alter my reality in the present? Is he changing all of my experiences? If you hold on to those, I'll come back up and we'll take those things together. As the ushers come, let's pray. Jesus, thank you for loving us. And thank you for freeing us from our past. Thank you for liberating us from worry about our futures. Thank you for allowing us to live fully alive in the moment that's in front of us. We love you. We thank you. And right now we remember all that you've done for us. In your name, amen.